Welcome, Discerning Minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a bit of a mission, really, peeling back the layers on a historical figure whose ideas, well, they still resonate today. Ideas forged, actually, in medieval Andalusia. We are talking about Abu Walid Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Rushd, though you might know him better by his Latinized name, Averroes. He was, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, one of the 12th century's most pivotal Islamic philosophers, a true polymath. His reach was just incredible. Our sources for this, well, they form this rich tapestry. We've got his life, his era, which was pretty tumultuous, his philosophy, and crucially his legacy. And that legacy cuts across law, medicine, logic, theology, philosophy itself. It's quite something.
Right. And our mission today essentially is to extract the really critical insights. How did Ibn Rushd manage to systematically integrate Aristotelian philosophy into Islamic thought? But more than just, how did he develop these really unique, sometimes, well, frankly, radical views on the relationship between philosophy and religion? That fundamental tension and the value for you listening in is to get a genuinely nuanced grasp of this incredibly complex rationalist thinker. He navigated these really challenging intellectual and religious landscapes. It's kind of a shortcut, maybe, to being well-informed on a figure who literally built bridges between worlds, influencing both the Islamic East and the Latin West.
So yeah, settle in. It's going to be a fascinating journey. We'll go from his aristocratic birth in Cordoba, this cultural crucible, through his controversial ideas, his exile even, and then explore that profound influence that, well, it shaped Western thought in ways we often don't fully appreciate.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's find out what made Ibn Rushd tick. All right, let's start with the man himself. Get grounded. Ibn Rushd, born 1126 in Cordoba, that's in Andalusia, modern-day southern Spain. And Cordoba back then, wow. It wasn't just any city. It was this dazzling hub, wasn't it? An intellectual jewel of the Islamic world.
Absolutely. You have to picture it. A place teeming with scholars, poets, scientists, philosophers, all sorts of backgrounds converging, ancient texts being translated, debated, new knowledge actively being forged. That was the world Abu Walid Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Rushd was born into.
Quite the starting point. And his family background, well, that's absolutely crucial. You can't understand his intellectual formation without it. He wasn't just from anywhere. He came from this really prominent line of scholars, jurists. His father, Ibn Rushd al-Hafid, was a highly respected Maliki jurist, a big deal judge right there in Cordoba.
Maliki. Right. Remind us quickly what that entails.
Yeah, it's one of the 4 major Sunni schools of Islamic law, known for relying on the practices of the people of Medina, emphasizing practical judgment. So think about it. He grew up where legal reasoning, ethical debate, intellectual rigor, it was just part of the air he breathed, part of the family business, almost.
Right. Not just encouraged, but embedded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just a biographical detail. It gave him this incredibly robust educational foundation right from the start. Exposed him early to science, philosophy, in a way that was pretty rare. It definitely shaped his, systematic way of thinking, his lifelong commitment to reason and to law.
What an incredible foundation. It really explains how he could pursue such a comprehensive education. He trained across, well, everything. Classical Islamic sciences, Arabic language, literature, the scholarly language, of course, logic, philosophy, medicine, and law.
That's right. And while his initial focus, probably due to his father, was Islamic law, it's clear he developed this deep, early fascination with Aristotle and other ancient Greek philosophers too.
Which makes total sense, given the context you describe. Andalusia, Cordoba. It was the place for that kind of inquiry. Aristotle wasn't just some dusty text. His works were being translated, intensely debated, critiqued. It was a living tradition.
A very vibrant scene. But, and this is important, this intellectual dynamism existed within a political and social context that was, well, fluid, sometimes volatile. Ibn Rushd lived through significant political upheaval in Andalusia. The 11th century before him saw fragmentation, lots of smaller dynasties. Then, in his time, the 12th century, you get the Almohads.
The Almohads, right, from North Africa.
Exactly. A Berber Muslim dynasty. They took control of much of Andalusia and the Maghreb. And their policies were interesting. A real mix. Reformist in some ways, but also conservative, religiously and intellectually.
How did that play out?
Well, on one hand, initially at least, Almohad rulers patronized scholars, philosophers. They fostered an environment where thinkers like Ibn Rushd could actually thrive. He served in their court as a physician and advisor.
Okay, so there was support.
Yes, but their rule also brought these increasingly conservative religious currents, a real emphasis on strict adherence to certain theological views. So you had this delicate balance, or maybe imbalance. It definitely impacted his later career. He's serving these powerful patrons who sometimes were also overseeing the very religious authorities who ended up condemning his views.
A tricky position.
And that tension eventually, it boiled over, didn't it?
Yeah.
Leading to real challenges for him. Exile, even. It did. Because of his, well, let's call them radical rationalist views. Especially on how philosophy and religion related, we'll be deeper into that. He came under heavy fire from some religious authorities. They saw his interpretations as, frankly, dangerous to orthodox beliefs.
So what happened?
At 1195, he was 69 years old. Then he was actually exiled from Cordoba by the Almohad ruler at the time, Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur. Apparently, he was pressured by these conservative factions. Ibn Rushd's works were banned. Some accounts say they were even publicly burned.
Wow. That must have been devastating for him.
Imagine being forced to stop writing. For a mind like his, agonizing. Now, the exile itself wasn't incredibly long before he was allowed back, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The reality of intellectual suppression. That constant push and pull between reason and dogma.
And sadly, he died just 3 years later, back in Cordoba in 1198.
But here's the kicker, right? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Exactly. Despite the personal hardship, the suppression, his ideas didn't just survive. They took flight after his death. They found resonance outside Andalusia and other parts of the Islamic world, and, maybe most significantly, had this huge impact in Europe.
Which sets us up perfectly to talk about his legacy. Proof that powerful ideas, well, they're hard to extinguish.
Definitely. And to really grasp the scale of what Ibn Rushd achieved, you need to understand the philosophical context he stepped into. He arrived near the end of what we call Islamic philosophy's golden age.
Right. Building on giants.
Absolutely. Thinkers who'd already been deeply influenced by Greek thought, Platonism, Neoplatonism, particularly Platonists.
Plightness, the idea of emanation from the one.
Precisely. And figures like Farabi, Ibn Sina, Avicenna in the West had already done incredible work systematizing this. Their big project was integrating reason, metaphysics, logic, science with core Islamic beliefs.
Showing it all fit together.
A rational universe compatible with faith. That was the goal. So Ibn Rushd wasn't working in a vacuum. He inherited this rich, complex tradition that had already tackled many of these big questions about philosophy and religion.
Okay, so he's building on this tradition, but then comes a major challenge to that whole project, right? Ghazali.
Exactly. Ghazali is a critical figure here. In Ibn Rushd's time, criticism of philosophy, especially from theologians and mystics, was definitely gaining ground. And Ghazali, who was this hugely influential theologian, jurist, mystic from Persia, he wrote Tahafut al-Falasifa.
The incoherence of the philosophers. Doesn't sound subtle.
It wasn't. This wasn't mild critique. It was a direct, powerful assault, mainly targeting Farabi and Ibn Sina, the key peripatetic figures. Ghazali argued their ideas fundamentally contradicted core Islamic beliefs.
Like what specifically?
Things like the eternity of the world. Ghazali said that denied God's absolute creative will, or the idea that God only knows universals, not particulars. He saw that as limiting God's omniscience and denying bodily resurrection. Big theological points.
And the impact was significant.
Huge. Ghazali's work severely damaged philosophy's reputation. It really did set back rationalist thought in parts of the Islamic world for quite some time. It wasn't just an academic spat, it was a paradigm shift, forcing a major reckoning.
Which makes Ibn Rushd's response even more remarkable.
Absolutely essential, even. He wrote Tafut al-Tafut.
The incoherence of the incoherence. I love the directness.
He wasn't pulling punches either. In this incredibly bold work, he took on every single one of Ghazali's criticisms. There were 20 main points, and just systematically dismantled them using rigorous philosophical arguments.
What was his core counter-argument?
Fundamentally, that philosophy didn't conflict with Islam. He went further. He argued it actually complemented Islam. That philosophy was the highest way to understand faith, providing the rational framework needed to grasp and even defend religious truths.
The highest way. That's a strong claim.
It is. And a key idea here, really radical for the time, was his view on knowledge itself. He argued reason is universal, accessible to anyone capable of it. Revelation, on the other hand, is also true knowledge, but it's presented in ways that different people can understand at different levels, depending on their intellectual capacity.
So different levels of understanding.
Exactly. Allowing for philosophical rigor for the few, but also ensuring religious truths were accessible to the masses.
Which raises that fascinating question, doesn't it? How can these two towering intellects, Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, look at the same core issues of faith and reason and come to such fundamentally opposite conclusions?
It really speaks to the enduring tension, the different ways humans approach ultimate questions.
And this engagement wasn't just internal to Islamic thought. Ibn Rushd's connection to the West. That's a whole other massive part of his legacy.
Oh, absolutely transformative. His works, especially those detailed commentaries on Aristotle, were painstakingly translated into Latin, often through Jewish scholars in places like Toledo, Spain, a real crossroads.
And these translations, they became foundational in Europe.
Foundational. They played a huge role in shaping scholastic philosophy in the medieval universities. He became known simply as the commentator, sometimes even the second teacher, right after Aristotle himself.
The second teacher, that's high praise.
It shows his perceived importance. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas were deeply influenced by him.
Even if they disagreed on points.
Oh, yes. Aquinas pushed back on some key Averroes ideas, like the unity of the intellect. But Ibn Rushd's method, his rigorous engagement with Aristotle, his emphasis on reason, profoundly shaped Aquinas' own project.
So it was a genuine cross-cultural dialogue.
A profound one. It forced intellectuals in both traditions, Islamic and Christian, to really grapple anew with philosophy and theology. It shows how ideas can just leap across boundaries and reshape entire intellectual landscapes.
Okay, let's really dig into Ibn Rushd's own system now, his blueprint for thought. You mentioned the harmony between reason and revelation being key.
It's the absolute cornerstone. His unwavering belief, not just a hope, but a core principle. He was convinced that the deeper truths within religion, they could be uncovered through philosophical reason. Reason wasn't the enemy of faith. It was a God-given tool to unlock its deeper meaning.
But he also saw a need for symbolism.
Right. He recognized that religious texts, the Quran specifically, are meant for everyone. So they often use symbols, metaphors. This allows the general populace, those without philosophical training, to grasp essential truths on a foundational level.
So philosophy isn't contradicting the texts.
Not at all. It's understanding them more deeply. For Ibn Rushd, the philosophical method was the way to reach the most profound truth, getting beyond just a literal reading, enriching one's understanding of faith. He fundamentally believed a truth reached through sound reason could never contradict a truth revealed by God. Any apparent conflict just meant you hadn't understood one or the other properly yet.
That's a powerful stance. And it leads to his distinction between different groups in society, right? The philosophers, scholars, masses. Which sounds a bit controversial.
It can sound that way, yeah. It's what some call a stratified epistemology, different levels of knowing. He argued society naturally had these three groups in terms of accessing knowledge, especially religious knowledge. First, the philosophers, the al-Burhan. They could grasp truth through demonstration, deep rational thought. They tackled the big metaphysical questions.
Okay, the deep thinkers.
Then, the scholars, or theologians, the al-Hadal, the alim. They used dialectical arguments, more persuasive, less demonstrative than the philosophers. They interpreted and taught religious knowledge.
Right, and the third group.
The general public, the al-Kitab, the hawk.
He believed they primarily accepted religious texts, literally, symbolically, through faith and obedience, guided by rhetoric and persuasion.
So this classification, it explains how the same text can be understood differently. Precisely. It's central to his whole argument. A single truth in revelation, but grasped with different depths. An anthropomorphic description of God, for instance. Literal for the masses, maybe dialectical for scholars, but allegorical for philosophers, revealing a deeper, non-literal truth about God's transcendence.
It's a way to maintain both popular piety and intellectual freedom, I suppose.
That seems to be the goal. Though, yes, it definitely raises questions about intellectual elitism, doesn't it?
It does. And this whole system, this tiered approach, it must rely heavily on logic.
Absolutely critical. Logic was the bedrock for him. Grounded in Aristotle, he insisted that accurate knowledge comes through logic and reasoning. He argued philosophy itself is incomplete, flawed even, without developing and applying logical sciences.
So logic isn't just theory, it's a practical tool.
Essential. It's the function that ensures knowledge is correct, consistent. It's the filter. You use logic syllogisms, proofs to weed out the false, the contradictory, the fuzzy thinking.
Revealing the truth underneath.
Exactly. He saw logic as this universal tool of human reason, applicable everywhere. Theology, science, philosophy. It's why his own system is so rigorous, so systematic, built on that logical foundation.
Okay, let's shift to his metaphysics.
Mhm.
His view of reality, of being. You said it was largely Aristotelian?
Yes, very much so. He adopted and really clarified Aristotle's view, moving away from some of the Neoplatonic ideas of predecessors like Ibn Sina. He divided being into two basic categories: necessary being and possible being.
Necessary being.
That's God.
That's God.
Whose
Yeah.
existence is inherent, uncaused. God just is. The absolute self-sufficient foundation needs nothing else to exist.
And possible beings.
That's everything else, all created things. Their existence isn't inherent. It depends entirely on the necessary being on God for both coming into existence and continuing to exist. And they are by nature mutable, changeable, impermanent, subject to generation and corruption, as Aristotle would say. This distinction is key to his whole cosmology.
And within that, how did he conceive of God specifically? His attributes?
God is absolutely central, positioned as the ultimate reality, the prime mover. God is singular, transcendent. His existence is necessary, as we said. He's the ultimate cause, the first principle of everything, but isn't himself caused,
External to the universe.
in the sense that God isn't part of the created order, but its source. God is unchanging, infinite, limitless, perfect, and God's unity is absolute. No multiplicity within God. All the diversity and change we see, that's only in created things. It reinforces God's unique status as the one true necessary being.
Okay, now, the eternity of the universe. This sounds like a major point of contention.
It was huge. Potentially incendiary, as you say, because while Ibn Rushd absolutely accepted that God created the universe, he followed Aristotle in maintaining that the universe is materially eternal.
Meaning, no beginning in time.
Essentially, yes, no absolute beginning or end point for the material world. It's in continuous motion and has always existed. Not uncaused, mind you, it's a perpetual effect of God's eternal causality.
So God's creation isn't a one-off event, but an ongoing process.
That's his argument. Subtle, but profound. And you can see why it was so contentious, right?
Yeah, it seems to fly right in the face of creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing at a specific time.
Exactly, which was the dominant theological view in both Islam and Christianity. The implications were massive. If the world always existed, does that limit God's power somehow?
It shows his commitment to philosophical reason, though, even when it clashed with dogma.
Absolutely, a prime example of his intellectual courage. He believed reason demanded this conclusion, and that it could be reconciled with faith, perhaps through a deeper symbolic reading of creation stories.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to undermine faith, but understand it through reason.
And this connects to causality, right? If the universe is eternal motion, what keeps it moving?
Right, he argued everything has a cause. But that chain of causes can't go back infinitely. There has to be an ultimate, uncaused cause, an unmoved mover, in Aristotelian terms.
And that's God again.
That's God, the first cause, the source of all existence, and the continuous principle behind that eternal motion, and the implication. It explains why natural laws are consistent, universal. The universe operates on understandable principles because there's this ultimate, rational, eternally active source sustaining it.
So scientific inquiry actually reveals God's design, in his view.
Precisely. The order and regularity of nature were, for him, evidence of the first cause.
Fascinating. Let's switch to epistemology, how we know things. He emphasized senses and reason.
Both are crucial. Knowledge, for Ibn Rushd, starts with the senses. We see, hear, touch. That's how we get the raw data from the external world, our initial grasp of particular things.
But it's limited.
Very limited.
Yeah.
Sensory knowledge is temporary, specific to the moment, the individual object. It's not universal. It doesn't give you the essence of things.
So how do we get from seeing, say, this specific apple to understanding the universal concept of appleness?
That's where the intellect reason comes in. It's the highest authority for knowledge in his system. The intellect takes that raw sensory data necessary, but insufficient, and processes it. It abstracts the universal forms from those concrete experiences.
So it's an active process.
Very active. Knowledge progresses from noticing many individual beautiful things, for example, to the intellect grasping the abstract, universal concept of beauty itself. It's quite similar to Aristotle's idea of intellectual intuition, the mind's ability to grasp universals once it has enough empirical grounding. The mind works to derive truth from experience.
And logic is needed to make sure that process is sound.
Absolutely essential. Logic is the tool for verification, for ensuring consistency. He adapted Aristotelian logic, saw it as the fundamental method for philosophy, for science.
To eliminate errors.
Exactly. Use logic systematically, and you can weed out the false, the contradictory, the sloppy thinking. It reveals the underlying truth. He believed the human intellect, guided properly by logic, could reliably distinguish truth from falsehood, reach certainty, It underpins his whole rational approach.
Okay, let's move into ethics and politics. The good life. What was the ultimate goal for Ibn Rushd?
The ultimate aim is happiness, Sada, but not just, fleeting pleasure. It's a deeper state of intellectual and spiritual flourishing, the highest good.
And how do we achieve that?
Only by consistently using our intellect, the rational part of our soul, and by engaging in virtuous, righteous actions. Knowledge and moral conduct are absolutely intertwined on the path to true fulfillment. It's very active, very intellectual.
And this connects to his view of the soul,
Yeah.
the three parts.
Yes, following Aristotle again, you have the vegetative soul, basic life functions shared with plants, the animal soul, senses, desires shared with animals, and the rational soul, which is uniquely human.
And that rational soul is key for virtue.
It's the essence of our humanity where virtue resides. Virtue, for him, isn't just being good. It's behavior that's consistent with reason, living according to our true rational nature.
So courage isn't just bravery, it's reasoned bravery.
Exactly. Temperance isn't denying desire, but rationally moderating it. It's about aligning your actions with your intellect, letting reason guide the lower parts of the soul.
And this individual virtue, it connects to society.
Directly. He strongly argued that ethics isn't just a private affair. Individual virtue is the building block for the moral development of the whole society.
So the personal and the collective are linked.
Absolutely. Things like good governance, justice, applying fair laws, that's the social dimension of ethics. Virtuous individuals create a virtuous society. And a just society helps individuals pursue happiness.
Which raises that interesting question again. How tightly did he see them linked? Can you have one without the other?
It's a great question. His view seems very integrated. Individual flourishing seems dependent on a just collective and vice versa.
That makes sense leading into his political philosophy, the purpose of the state.
Very clearly, ethically driven. The state exists to ensure the common good. Its goal is to provide for citizens' happiness and enable them to live virtuously.
More than just keeping order then, fostering flourishing.
Yes. Which means the ideal ruler needs to be knowledgeable and virtuous. Someone genuinely looking after the people's welfare, prioritizing justice and wisdom, not just power. Echoes of Plato's philosopher king, perhaps, but in an Islamic context.
And law is central to this, given his background.
Hugely central. His legal knowledge was profound, rooted in that Maliki tradition. His big legal work, Bidayat al-Mujtahid, is this amazing comparative study of different Islamic law schools. Shows his analytical power.
And the role of law in society.
Essential for social order. Essential for implementing justice. But crucially, law must be compatible with both reason and religion. It needs to be a rational, divinely informed framework guiding society towards ethical living, towards perfection.
Okay, let's look at the natural world now. Science, his view on natural laws.
He had a very clear philosophy of nature. Natural phenomena aren't arbitrary, not constant divine fiddling. They happen because of inherent, natural, rational causes.
And these laws are consistent.
Continuous, unchanging, universal. That's key. They operate the same way everywhere. Always, which of course makes scientific inquiry possible and meaningful.
How did he handle miracles then, if laws are unchanging?
A tricky point. His view was nuanced. Miracles weren't violations of natural law, but maybe manifestations of deeper, more subtle natural processes we don't fully grasp. Or God working through natural laws in extraordinary ways under specific conditions. It's a way to preserve both divine agency and an orderly, rational universe. God works through consistent laws, not usually by breaking them.
And his own scientific work, particularly in medicine, reflects this rational approach.
Completely. It's fascinating how his practical work as a physician mirrored his philosophy. He wasn't just theorizing.
He's a court physician, right?
Yes, and renowned. He interpreted and systematized the huge legacy of Galen and Hippocrates' foundational texts for medicine. But he also pushed for experimental medicine, observation, clinical experience.
Did he write medical texts?
Oh, yes. His big one was Kulliyat fi al-Tibb, the General Principles of Medicine, known as Collegiate in Latin. It became a standard textbook for centuries, covering anatomy, physiology, diagnosis, everything. His medical works had a massive influence in the Islamic world and later in Europe, really cemented his polymath status, bridging theory and practice.
It really does show he wasn't just a philosopher, a true polymath, and prolific, around 30 works.
An astonishing output, especially given the political ups and downs he faced, covering philosophy, medicine, law, logic, theology.
We've touched on the big ones, Tafut al-Tafut, His rebuttal to Ghazali, absolutely foundational for defending philosophy.
Crucial. And his commentaries on Aristotle, the Talikat ala Kitab al-Shifa, not just summaries, but deep analyses that basically reintroduced Aristotle to many,
Right, vital for transmission. Then his legal work, Bidayat al-Mujtahid.
showcasing that deep legal expertise.
And Kulliyat fi al-Tib, his medical encyclopedia.
Exactly. The breadth is just staggering, really underscores his intellectual weight.
So, after all this work, how was it received, particularly in the Islamic world?
It was complex, a mixed bag, really. On one hand, highly respected in many intellectual circles. His commentaries on Aristotle were incredibly clear, very influential for study, but his more, let's say, original or radical rationalist views, especially on the eternity of the world, the unity of the intellect, how exactly philosophy and religion fit, those drew heavy criticism.
From who, mainly?
More conservative theological factions, mystical groups. They found his approach too rationalistic, potentially undermining traditional interpretations of scripture and divine power. It felt threatening to orthodoxy for some.
So his legacy there was debated.
Very much so, posthumously. Some later Islamic thinkers admired his rigor, his defense of reason. Others remained wary, seeing his ideas as potentially problematic for faith. It wasn't a simple acceptance.
But then there's the West, a completely different story, almost.
In many ways, yes.
Mm.
His impact on Western philosophy was just immense, profound. Those Latin translations we talked about, they landed right in the heart of the developing medieval universities.
Reintroducing Aristotle.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
After centuries where only parts of Aristotle were known in Latin, Ibn Rushd provided comprehensive commentaries, forcing Christian thinkers to grapple with the full system.
And influencing figures like Aquinas.
Hugely. Even when Aquinas disagreed with him, and he did disagree strongly on key points like the intellect, which had implications for individual immortality and salvation, Ibn Rushd's method, his rational engagement with Aristotle, was incredibly influential. Aquinas adopted a similar systematic approach.
Being called the commentator, the second teacher, it really says it all.
It underscores his pivotal role. He fundamentally changed the trajectory of Western philosophical and theological thought.
So bringing it all together, what does Ibn Rushd mean for us today now?
Well, if we connect it to the bigger picture, he's still incredibly relevant.
Right.
A major reference point in modern philosophy, religious studies. Anywhere people are wrestling with that dialogue between reason and religion, his systematic effort to reconcile them still resonates. And his ideas are still debated, particularly in the Islamic world debates about ijtihad, independent reasoning law, freedom of interpretation, the role of critical thought.
So the questions he grappled with are still alive.
Absolutely. Faith and reason, tradition and innovation, revelation and rational inquiry. His legacy is a testament to the timelessness of these fundamental human questions. He invites us constantly to think about how we navigate these very tensions in our own world, our own societies, our own lives.
What an incredible journey we've taken, really unpacking Ibn Rushd's life, his thought. He stands out, doesn't he, this bridge builder between ancient philosophy, medieval theology, between cultures, and some surprising things along the way. That intellectual lineage, those radical views on the universe, and how his influence exploded despite the exile, the controversy.
It's a powerful story. His pursuit of truth wasn't easy, clearly.
Not at all, but vital.
Indeed. Ibn Rushd really challenged his own time to think critically about revelation, about reason. His life is this reminder, isn't it, that pursuing knowledge, even when it's tough, even when it causes friction, it can create these incredible, enduring bridges across time, across cultures. Ideas persist. And maybe it leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In what ways are we still navigating that same tension between faith and reason, belief and rational inquiry in our own lives, our own societies, right now? How do we find harmony? Or how do we grapple with the dissonance? It's a question Ibn Rushd forces us to keep asking.
A really powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Ibn Rushd. We hope it sparked some thoughts, maybe encouraged your own explorations into these fascinating tensions. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep digging deeper.